what I thought we would do today is we're going to do a few case reviews and just have a little bit of a chat. Because we're recording, make sure we don't use any patient identifiable information. And I thought we might take the opportunity as well, maybe in the first 10 minutes, just to ask you a couple of questions about yourself so people can get to know you. And then we'll go into the case reviews, and then, you know, I can always take those off if we need to keep those more private. That's fine, so you can be open and honest about them. Cool. So how did you first get into physio?
I've done these questions. Okay, how did I first get into physio? It's a bit of a long story, so I'll try and keep it really short. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a vet, but I didn't want to spend 7 years at uni at the time, and I didn't think I'd get the grades. I googled which A levels I did. This is probably not the right answer, and physio came up. So the more I looked into physio, the more I was like, oh, that does sound like something that I want to do, and something that sounds quite interesting. And yeah, that's it really. I just kept looking more into what to do and how to get experience. And so we had to write our personal statement for uni. So that's how it kind of came up originally. Yeah, and then the more I looked into it, the more I was like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then it was more challenges, because it's really hard to get work experience. So I quite like the challenge of that. And then got work experience, got a job as an apprentice. Yeah, and then went from there.
Ah, cool. Were there any, who do you remember? Like for me, I always remember, I was doing work experience with the lady that, one of the ladies that I grew up with. And I'll always remember this one chap, and obviously I'm sort of more specialised in sports physio now, but I still treat patients who've had strokes and spinal cord injuries and the neuro side. But this particular guy, I just remember him being kind of, just watching him, he had a stroke, so he had a hemiplegia, couldn't use his arm. And I just remember her just analytical brain just going in. She's a really soft, lovely lady, but her analytical brain was just like, right, how do we get from this to this? And I just love that kind of problem solving part of it. Do you think there was any patient that you remember who was like that?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, when I was shadowing, so I was lucky enough to shadow a community therapist originally.
Yeah,
he went to see a chap he was in the Marines. He'd been hit by a car, so it wasn't directly related to his job, but he'd been hit by a car. He was in a coma, I think for about 2 years. He was in a coma for a really long time. And then when he woke up, he was told that he'd never walk again and that he wouldn't be able to do anything. Obviously, being a Marine, he wasn't going to take that. So he set a goal that he wanted to do the 3 Peaks challenge with his brother. Bearing in mind, yeah, he was told he couldn't walk at all. But he was like, I'm going to walk, and I'm not just going to walk. I'm going to climb some mountains, and not just one. I'm going to do 3. So yeah, when I went to see him, he was actually walking with a frame, and then the physio was helping him transfer from a frame to 2 sticks. So whilst this physio session was going on, I was talking to his parents. So he'd have to move back in with his parents and everything. They'd have to get all level access for a wheelchair and things like that. So it was a huge change to his life. Obviously, he was used to being a really active person. But listening to a bit of his story from his parents was just so inspiring, to be able to hear how awful it was to begin with, and then being able to look at this guy in front of me who just seemed a totally different man. He just, he was up and walking pretty well as well. Obviously still shaky, he was still weak, he still had quite an ataxic gait, so it wasn't perfect, but it was miles from where he thought he could be or should be. And then when the physio had finished, he was writing up her notes, so I actually got a chance to speak to the patient, and he told me his side of the story. So obviously the parents from the outside, and then him from, he lived it. And yeah, it was amazing to see how far he'd come and how much work he'd had to put in. But I remember what he said was he just wouldn't have been where he was or anywhere near without physios. And he'd had a few physios along the line that kind of discharged him and said, this is your new baseline, that's all you'll get to. And he just had that mindset of, I want more, I want the best, and just kept pushing himself. And then he'd found physios that had joined in with that and been on board and also wanted to push him. So it was amazing kind of, seeing that. And then, so that was before I even thought about getting my apprenticeship. And then by pure chance, on my last day of my apprenticeship, I was cleaning down the gym, just doing one of my jobs. I heard a patient come in, go on the treadmill, start running on the treadmill, went over to clean the bikes that were next door, and it was that same patient running on a treadmill. So that for me was like almost the nail in the coffin of that's what I'm going to do, because that's obviously possible.
Oh, it's our job is so full of those fascinating stories. I mean, it's so inspiring when you see these people, and you know, who defines who we are anyway? You know, that particular guy. How dare anyone define this is who you're going to be, this is how you're going to live? Because the only thing that really makes up who we are as people is what we choose. So if we choose to transform and be a person who faces these challenges, be a person who persists despite pain, despite adversity, and we're kind of that catalyst, I think, to change. Hopefully through our videos for saying, come on, you can do this, and giving them the belief. So being those people who are not always popular, saying the hard truth, and no, come on, we need more than this, and making sure we never set a ceiling on someone, because how could we possibly know, you know, as a healthcare professional, even, you know, to say that someone's never going to walk again. I mean, you need to prepare people that there may be some disability, there may be some things that they will find difficult, and we focus on the things that people can do, not what they can't. But who knows what will happen in the future? You know, with MS, we always said there'd never be a cure. They've had great results with stem cells. You know, the guy who had the operation of the spinal cord, although I think the ethics are a bit haphazard with that, but you know, it's potential, isn't it? It's amazing. So it's great to hear that from you. And what's kind of your, I mean, you know, what things do you enjoy? I was going to say, what's your favourite? But I said to Ellen earlier, we probably shouldn't have a favourite thing. But what sort of, who are your ideal clients, and what kind of conditions do you really like seeing?
I think from that, I quite enjoy seeing people that are at their lowest, or what they think is their lowest, who've struggled, not necessarily for a long time, but enough to know that that's not what they want anymore. So they kind of choose to not be a victim of that pain, or, you know, of that condition, or whatever might be going on, and they're choosing to do something about it. And motivation is difficult because you don't always have the same high level of motivation. It dips, and there's peaks and troughs, but definitely patients that are committed to change, they've reached that point where they're like, enough is enough, and I want to do something about it, rather than the ones that sometimes feel a bit like, this is just how it is, it's always going to be like this, and just don't have that I guess that passion or that drive to try. That's all we can do.
And I guess for those people, if there's anybody like that who's listening, it's understanding that it's a choice. Like, sometimes we can sit and we can't possibly understand how they feel because we haven't been through it ourselves. They can't explain their experiences. But it's really helping them to understand that they don't just have to put up with it, and actually the way that we perceive things, the level of commitment that we put into exercise, and maybe people at home going, but I tried so much, I've tried so many things. And that's kind of my passion with the Physio, and bringing all you brilliant guys on to get involved in the company, is I don't want an NHS to tell me I've got to close a hydro pool because it's too expensive. I don't want somebody to say, well, we can't have an Alter-G because it's too expensive. You know, when people are spending money with us, what I want them to realise is that actually they're building the future to help other people. You know, we're going to spend that money on getting an Alter-G so that people can, you know, use that. And it may be in the future that we actually can fund research trials. So we can say, right, okay, can we actually, rather than it being funded by a pharmaceutical company or somebody who has an ulterior motive, we can actually come in as physios quite quickly, because we are talking to patients every day and say, right, well, what things can we try and how can we progress the profession forward? So I'm excited to get everybody involved in that. And so let's maybe talk about a couple of cases. So is there anybody that you've been seeing at the moment? Perhaps you can tell people at home a little bit about what they were like when they first came in, and then maybe we'll have a couple of cases that you've seen. Sorry that I haven't prepared you for this. A couple of cases that you've seen and maybe they've been improved and has inspired, and then maybe we'll talk about a couple of cases that we're struggling with, and we can just talk through what might be going on with those guys, because I've explained to everyone before you came on board, I've explained that we do these kind of case review sessions, A, for something to put into your CPD, B, to show people what we're doing for professional development, and 3, because actually other people can learn from the information that we're sharing, and then can progress forward. So like I said, no patient identifiable information. If you need to change the sex or age, that's absolutely fine, but maybe we can have a little chat about those people and work out what we can do to make their treatment better and try and get them a bit better, a bit quicker.
Okay, so someone that's not better, or someone that has.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do 2 of people that you've seen recently and things that have worked, and then we'll do 2 kind of analysis of things that we can improve and look to improve or look to add and case discuss.
Yeah, okay. So I had a lady who had a fall off a boat, actually, so it was a little bit random, but slipped off the side of a boat and hit her back on the boat. Felt that when she was in the water, she couldn't move her legs. She felt like she was paralysed. Obviously, really panicked. Luckily, her son was on board, so pulled her out and things, and she was okay. Rang for the ambulance. Ambulance came. Paramedics came, and didn't take her to hospital. They kind of said, it should resolve. Gave her paracetamol. Left. I think they were there a lot longer, but obviously they didn't feel that there was a need for any scans or anything like that. When the patient came to me, they were very much like, I think I need to get this scanned, I need to get this x-rayed to know what's going on. So we had a bit of a chat about scans and what they mean, and that they might show things that aren't the cause of our pain, they might not show things and we still have pain. We know from experience that sometimes we can get 10 x-rays and they all show the same thing. Some of them will be symptomatic, some patients won't be. So it's kind of decreasing that reliance. They're nice to guide us or to let us know what could be going on, but not to rely on that. And I think for her, that gave her a bit more confidence as to, okay, maybe I don't need that. In this situation, she was also osteoporotic, so she had a few risk factors as well. So I did recommend that she had an x-ray just to clear out any fractures, because there was a couple of flags that needed a little bit of intervention. So she had that x-ray. She did have a fracture, but they weren't sure whether it was new or old. So again, I think that was actually quite a good thing to kind of show that she might have had that fracture for a long time and not had any back pain. So that kind of concreted what I was saying about us not being reliant.
Do you mind if I just jump in there quickly for people?
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting case, and I completely agree with you. Just to give her a bit of peace of mind. There's going to be physio jumping up and down, but with the history of osteoporosis, osteoporosis normally occurs later in life. It can happen if we are not loading through the bone as well, and sometimes it can cause little fractures. Now, a lot of the time with osteoporotic fractures, if they are very small and unplaced in some areas, they will treat it conservatively anyway, so they won't go in and stabilise the surgery. So a lot of it is about what are the implications, what are the risk factors. So are they, for example, finding it impossible to weight bear on their leg? Are they finding that there's bony tenderness? Is there massive bruising? Is there massive swelling? And I think sometimes people forget that with physios. In an assessment, you have 45 minutes. We go through all of these things in a lot of detail. So if you're a bit worried, if you're sat at home and you're thinking, I'm not really sure whether I should have had a scan, just come in and see a physio. If you don't want to commit to coming in, then just jump on a discovery call and we can give you an indication whether it's something we would be able to help you with and whether it's something that might need a scan or not. You need to be really careful, of course, that we don't become over-reliant on scans because they don't always give a clear picture. And actually, there's studies that show if you have, for example, for back pain, a scan, you actually, because a lot of people will say, well, there's no harm in having a scan, why don't we just have one? But actually, the outcomes are worse, even if the person doesn't have anything that correlates. So when we look at scans, if we're looking at MRI, we may see a disc protrusion at L5. Now, we know that the symptoms of an L5 disc protrusion will be in certain areas, will be certain levels of weakness, and the back pain may be, like you say, not correlated with it. So I think that's a really important thing to know. And so if we just dive into that case a little bit more, I'm always telling people on our videos, you know, how we look holistically. What were the kind of things that were important to you as a physio that you looked at with her? So from a physical perspective, from a mental perspective, from maybe what she was doing in terms of her home life, what were the things that kind of you thought about with her?
So looking at how they were before, so what their baseline was, how much they were doing, was she in work, what kind of work was she in, so was it quite sedentary, was she sitting for long periods of time, did she need to be moving heavy loads, that kind of thing. Any kind of barriers to recovery, so like some of my patients, I had a couple in yesterday who had an 18-month-old daughter. They brought her to the physio assessment, which was absolutely fine. She was into everything, so they didn't get a second to sit still. So knowing whether people are up and about all the time or have those kind of things, so rest for them wouldn't be an option, or doing less, it's not really an option, because we know that life goes on just because you're injured. Unfortunately, you often don't get time off or time, you know, to take for yourself. So being able to adapt exercises and things like that. So looking ahead at whatever I was going to give this person to do, can she fit that into her daily routine? Is it realistic? Is it achievable? Those kind of things. So making it quite specific to the patient. Looking at any other past medical history, so like we've just discussed, whether there's any kind of other flags that we need to look at, or any medical conditions. What else do we look at? So their movements, so full assessment, so I looked at their movements, any kind of sensation changes, that kind of thing, strength, how they move, so not just whether they can get from sit to stand, but the quality of that movement and whether they are really stiff. So I always kind of assess from the moment that I see that patient downstairs, so I greet you in reception, and you might not know it, but I've looked at how you've got off that stool and walked towards me.
I know you're looking at me, I know you're looking at me.
And quite sneakily I follow you up the stairs so I can see how you're going up and downstairs. So I've already assessed you by the time you've come into the room. So yeah, so we've got a bit of a head start, because I think that once people think that you're watching, they move differently. So it's quite nice to be able to see that before.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people don't understand that that isn't because people are putting something on. You know, people often say, oh, it's just because I'm putting on, like whiplash is a classic one. You will look at them when they're sat and they'll be moving their head around, and then you'll ask them to move, they can't move it. And people think, well, you know, I'm not making it up. And we know that as physios, they're not, people don't have pain. But it's actually the brain, and we spend a lot of time educating people on the brain. The brain is actually conditioned to, when you get the stimulus, the thought to move, the muscles can tighten. And we did a couple of weeks ago, might be 2 weeks ago now, we did I don't know if you were in on that training day on a Friday. There was a lady who we were trying to get her to bend forward and bend up, and she just could not do it. Her back muscles were just, every time she went to lean forward, was switching on. And we just spent literally 5 minutes just saying, and relax and bend, and training her brain that it doesn't need to be fearful of movement. Because what often happens is you'll say to them, lean forward, and everything will tighten up and they'll go down. People at home might be thinking, oh yeah, I recognize this. But then when you actually get them to switch it off, or you ask them, is it painful? They'll say, no, it's not painful. So why is it that the muscles are contracting when it's not even painful? It's a conditioned response, the same as Pavlov's dogs. When you've got just for people who may not be familiar, they brought food to a dog and they rang a bell. And then they did that over several weeks, I can't remember how long. The response becomes conditioned, and then what happens is when you ring the bell, even when the presence of food isn't there, the dog will salivate. So we have to start using science a lot more to help us to understand and treat patients more efficiently. Just diving back to that patient with osteoporosis, the other thing that I would consider there would just be maybe why have they got osteoporosis? Are they postmenopausal? Have they been immobile? Do they need strength and conditioning? Just to make sure that every contact counts. So what my biggest fear is that someone will come in and I'll have a hard truth conversation with them, and 10 years later I'll see them with a stroke. And it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen. I've been qualified 10 years. I know that there will be people that I meet that I will feel like I failed because I didn't make enough of an impact. I didn't sell the idea of a healthy lifestyle, exercise enough in the beginning. And so Were there any factors like that about that specific patient that we could have maybe tapped into? Was there anything that you considered there?
So she was still quite active. So she was semi-retired, but still did do some work. So she was still fairly active. Generally led quite a healthy lifestyle, but was postmenopausal. So yeah, there was that. And just feeling like, and I've had it with a couple of my patients actually, who feel like when they get to retirement age, they should slow down. They're expected to slow down.
Yeah, the myth of we have to slow down, we're old.
Yeah, and it's like what makes them feel that, or makes them feel like they're old. And it's made me look a lot more actually at how society treats people who are of retirement age, because I do have another patient as well who's quite big on that, and noticed that when she came up to retirement, people were just like, what are you going to do now you're retired, you know, you've got nothing to do. And I mean, she really grabbed the bull by the horns and made a list, and everyone who came to her retirement party had to set her a challenge. So I thought that was a fantastic way of counteracting that. She's got lots of challenges to do. But yeah, back to the other patient. Yeah, she had a couple of risk factors, but she knew, and we had a conversation about what they can do. I've discharged her today actually, but to go away and do some more exercises, and yeah, she's picked up extra things. So
fantastic. Let's move on to another case then. Maybe someone that you've been finding a little bit tricky, and if you can just explain their history, making sure that there's no patient identifiable information, just to remind you. And then we can have a little chat through about what you've done, what we can consider, and then we'll talk about some of the research surrounding it if I can think of anything off the top of my head too.
Okay. Who shall we go with? So a patient who I've been seeing for a while came in with back pain, with lower back pain. There wasn't much of a pattern that she could identify. It was twinges, it was different types of pain. So it was twinges, it was a bit of a sharper pain, it was a dull ache. And it wouldn't always be the same thing. So for example, moving clothes in a wardrobe, most of the time that movement of having to brace herself and push, that seemed to bring it on. But then some days she would do that and not feel anything at all. And we tried a couple of different things with her. Had a look at her movement. She was quite locked in the back, and I think you were there on that training day actually, Nicole, so you saw her. She was quite locked in the back. And then we did a bit of manipulation there, a bit of mobilizations there, to loosen that off and to help things switch off and to help her move a little bit better. But yeah, it's just every time we come in, we try something, we test and retest. So we'll test something, we'll do an exercise or do a bit of soft tissue work to see whether we can affect a change. And then we'll retest and see if the movement's any different or any stronger or has changed, and then go from there.
Yeah, so that's quite helpful because I know this patient as well, and it's quite a common thing. So a lot of the time with back pain, it's helping to get the consistency from the patient doing things. And this patient is very motivated, and I know I'm doing regular exercise, but there's a lot of other things going on in the background. And I think that's something important. If you have got back pain, it's really important to know that 80% of the population will have non-specific lower back pain. So that's the pain that comes and goes, worse in the morning, it doesn't affect the legs, and that's very, very common. And we know that the best thing for that is daily exercise, stay really active, stay nice and fit, not because you've got a weak core. Lots of people think it's all about having a weak core. But if you imagine that sorry to be a bit gruesome, but when you're dissecting spines, you can do this to them, you're not going to break them, that's all the muscles off. The back is actually inherently strong. And so what we need to do is, if the body or the brain is receiving signals coming from the back and it's giving you pain when there isn't danger, then it's being oversensitive. So it's about training and desensitizing that system. And I would say if we're getting a little bit of change, but it's not fully going, I would then start ramping up a little bit more and trying to, lots of reassurance, but maybe take the patient out on the TRX machine, get her doing some abductions, some hamstring curls, just try and get her not thinking. Because the problem is because she's had severe pain, and you need to remember that when people have severe pain, it's awful. They do anything to avoid it. And I mean, I don't know about you, Camille, but I've had really bad back pain, and it was the worst pain that I've ever felt in my life. And I couldn't move, I couldn't get on the toilet, I couldn't even stand up. It was awful. So I'm not surprised that if you have that for a long period of time, people don't want to move. So we have to change the signal. So if the signal from the brain is, I lean forward, I tighten up, we need to trick the brain in a way. And when we're talking about the brain, we're not talking about the personality of the person. It's not to do with that. It's much more to do about chemicals in the brain, the way that the neurons are firing, the way that things are conditioned. So one thing that you might want to try and consider doing